Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is wild, and it's shaking up the entire global economy. Because right now, even the United States is panicking. Not over AI, not over inflation, but over a chip company that most people had never heard of until now. It's a story of sanctions gone wrong, supply chains collapsing, and global industries on the brink. And believe it or not, Trump himself is stepping in to stop a full-blown economic implosion. So buckle up because we're diving deep into the shocking Nexperia seizure crisis, how it started, why it's spiraling out of control, and why it could be the biggest self-inflicted wound the West has made in years. The seizure that shook the world. Let's rewind for a moment. The Netherlands, yes, the same country known for tulips and windmills, just seized control of Nexperia, a major Chinese-owned chip producer that makes around 100 billion chips every single year. These aren't fancy AI chips that power ChatGPT or NVIDIA's GPUs. These are legacy chips, the quiet workhorses used in everything from washing machines and smartphones to, most importantly, cars. Nexperia's chips account for nearly a quarter of all global legacy chip supply. That means one company, now under Dutch control, is effectively holding 25% of the world's industrial production capacity in its hands. And this entire situation exploded almost overnight. How we got here? Back in 2019, a Chinese tech firm called Wingtech bought Nexperia. Everything seemed normal until Washington started turning up the heat. Fast forward to 2025. Under renewed U.S. pressure and Trump's aggressive trade policies, the Dutch government seized control of Nexperia. The official excuse? National security. But everyone knew what it really was. A geopolitical chess move to keep critical chip supply chains out of China's reach. And China didn't take it quietly. They hit back. Hard. Beijing retaliated by restricting exports of Nexperia's chips to the rest of the world, and suddenly the world's industrial engine began to choke. The domino effect begins. The result? A massive ripple effect across the global economy. Companies like Volkswagen in Germany and Honda in Japan suddenly found themselves in crisis. Production lines slowed down. Assembly plants halted operations. Even Honda's Canadian and Mexican factories, key suppliers for the North American market, were forced to cut production. And guess what models were affected? Their best sellers, like the legendary Honda Civic. No chips, no cars. It's that simple. But here's the crazy part. The US tried to bring auto manufacturing home with its reshoring push. Companies built plants in America to avoid tariffs and dependence on China. But what's the point of reshoring if the chips still come from China, and now they're not coming at all? According to US auto lobby groups, American car factories are just weeks away from running out of chips completely. 2 to 4 weeks. That's how close we are to massive shutdowns across the auto industry. Global supply chain breakdown. Let's talk logistics for a second. Most of the chips Nexperia makes in Europe don't get finished there. Around 70% of EU-made chips are actually packaged and assembled in China before being shipped worldwide. So when the Netherlands cut off shipments to China, they didn't just hurt Beijing, they crippled themselves too. The auto giants in Europe and North America are literally begging for supply. And meanwhile, China is prioritizing its own manufacturers. If Beijing controls the tap, who do you think gets the water first? Of course, Chinese automakers like BYD and NIO will be first in line. Western companies like Ford, GM, and Honda will be left scrambling. Trump's panic and the US backfire. And that's when Trump himself got involved. Yes, the same man who pushed for the seizure in the first place is now reportedly trying to undo the damage. Washington is quietly begging Beijing to resume chip exports as part of a broader trade negotiation. But here's the catch. China won't budge unless Nexperia is allowed to resume normal operations and supply its own factories again. In other words, the US created a mess that only China can now fix. A textbook example of sanctions backfiring in spectacular fashion. Because today's global economy isn't built on isolation. It's built on interdependence. Break one link in the chain, and the entire system trembles. The rise of Chinese dominance. Here's where things get even more interesting. While the West scrambles, China is quietly expanding. By 2027, China is expected to control nearly 40% of all legacy chip production, 4 out of every 10 chips made globally. And because Chinese factories produce at a lower cost, their chips will be significantly cheaper than anything coming from the US or Europe. More than half of all global expansion projects in this space are Chinese-led. The dominance is practically sealed for the next decade. And with that dominance comes bargaining power. China doesn't need to shout or sanction. They can simply say, "You want chips? Then play by our rules." That's why Washington is panicking. Because even if the US leads in AI chips, it's the legacy chips that actually keep the world running, from airplanes to refrigerators to electric vehicles. The auto war intensifies. Let's look at what's happening on the ground. Chinese cars are flooding the European market at record speed. Despite tariffs, Chinese automakers have already captured 7.4% of all car sales in Europe, and the numbers are still climbing. EV sales from China are growing 11% annually, and hybrid car sales are up 15%. European brands simply can't compete on price anymore, and if the chip crisis worsens, even more European factories will shut down, while Chinese exports fill the void. The West thought it could choke China by seizing Nexperia, but in reality, it's choking itself. Inflation and the new asset bubble. Now let's zoom out for a second, because all of this chaos is happening while the US economy is inflating again. Remember the AI boom? It's turning into an AI bubble. The Federal Reserve has quietly restarted money printing. US money supply, or M2, just hit a record $22.2 trillion, rising 4.5% in just 1 month. That's right. We're back in the expansion zone, and inflation isn't going anywhere. Every extra dollar pumped into the economy drives up asset prices, from stocks to gold to Bitcoin. Wall Street knows it, and they're going all in. Banks are lending aggressively again. Speculative money is flooding into tech stocks, and every company from Microsoft to McDonald's is shouting AI in their earnings calls just to keep the hype going. But behind the scenes, liquidity is drying up. U.S. bank reserves have fallen to their lowest level since 2020, hovering around $2.8 trillion. If defaults begin, we could see another bailout wave and another round of massive money printing. In short, the casino is open again, and everyone's gambling like it's 2008 all over. The G7's desperate gambit. Now let's talk about the latest twist, the G7's grand plan to fight back. Realizing how dependent they've become on Chinese resources, the G7 is forming a critical minerals alliance. The idea? Build a Western supply chain for raw materials and break China's dominance. It sounds noble until you see the price tag. We're talking trillions of dollars in subsidies, price floors, and stockpiling just to make it viable. They want to guarantee mine survival through offtake agreements, basically promising to buy minerals no matter the cost. But here's the fatal flaw. Western governments are drowning in debt. To fund this plan, they'll have to borrow even more, which means more inflation, higher deficits, and weaker currencies. And even then, they can't compete with China's efficiency. Beijing can flood markets with cheap supply or tighten exports at will, controlling global prices like a puppet master. So while the G7 tries to build castles in the sand, China sits comfortably behind its fortress walls, watching. Canada's tea with China. Here's the irony. At the same time Western governments are talking tough, they're quietly trying to rebuild relations with Beijing. Even Canada's Prime Minister, who once criticized China openly, is now preparing to visit Beijing to revive trade ties. It's the perfect metaphor for the West's trap, caught between political pride and economic reality. They need China's markets, they need China's chips, and they need China's minerals. So let's sum it all up. The Netherlands seizes a Chinese chip firm under U.S. pressure. China retaliates by restricting exports. Global supply chains collapse. Factories shut down. Inflation grows. And the West ends up spending trillions trying to fix a crisis it created. It's the perfect storm, a moment that shows how fragile the modern world truly is. The more the West tries to decouple from China, the deeper it sinks into dependence. And that's why the Nexperia crisis isn't just about chips, it's about power, control, and the future of globalization itself. So, What do you think? Will the US and the Netherlands backtrack on the Nexperia seizure? Can the G7 really build a new supply chain to rival China, or is this just another expensive illusion? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you found this video insightful, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss another deep dive like this one. Because as the global chip war heats up, we'll be right here breaking it all down for you. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.